Overwatch Season 3 has some of the best balance that we've seen since the start of Overwatch 2, and while things are a lot better than before, there are a lot of heroes that the community thinks deserves buffs, nerfs, and rework, so we're gonna break down the top 10 of those and talk about exactly what needs to happen. But do me a huge solid and smash that like, subscribe if you enjoy the content, check out my private coaching in the links down below, and let's jump into the video. Now the first character that we gotta talk about is a DPS that has risen through the ranks and is one of the most dominant DPS in the game right now, and that's Cassidy. Now, Cassidy isn't really that bad of a character to have in meta because it's not one-tapping you from super far away, and it definitely isn't one of the most frustrating characters to play against that you could possibly imagine, like Sojourn being pocketed or a Widowmaker running rampant. However, there is a super frustrating aspect of Cassidy's kit, and y'all all know it's his damn sticky grenade, and even this has caught Blizzard's attention. We know that Cassidy might be getting a sticky grenade rework or a tweak. Now, I'm on the side of getting it just a full rework. I think the vast majority of Cassidy players don't really like the ability, myself included, and the vast majority of people that play against it think it's a unskilled, silly ability that gives you way too much damn value. I mean, 131 damage from a single nade? Come on, that makes no goddamn sense. And I know some of you like wanted a lasso and have it like slow the enemy, and perhaps some form of slow would be okay. But if we're going to reintroduce CC to the character, it seems weird that we removed his stun grenade in the first place. But I guess a hard stun's a lot different than a soft stun. But yeah, I don't exactly know. What kind of ability would you like to see on Cassidy? And do you agree that the sticky grenade needs to leave? The next character that we got to talk about is Zarya, one of the worst characters in the meta right now. Zarya could definitely use some buffs if she wanted to be stronger in the meta. However, I think that we have to be cautious about this one. While a lot of people, Zarya mains, really want Zarya to be good, you got to understand that I think Zarya plays on that edge between not really that played and completely busted. And y'all remember how good Zarya was back in Zarya meta, and while she's not as strong now as she was then, she is pretty powerful at retaining her charge because of some changes a while back. And I actually do think that you could play Zarya in a number of different situations, and she's a pretty good counter picker against some tanks as well. So yeah, I would err on the side of not doing anything with Zarya, but let me know if you agree or disagree about this one down below. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Genji. Now, notably, I've been playing Genji, doing my unranked to GM, playing primarily in Masters games. However, the past, like, I don't know, freaking 2-3 hours of games on Genji, ever since I hit Masters 1, I've been playing primarily in mid to high GM games on Genji. And let me tell you, this character is really fucking hard to play against good players. Now, when you play Genji against players that make all these mistakes, he's actually not that bad right now when you play him with a dive. Like, if you're playing him with a Doom or a Hammond, you can get him to work, but it's really, really hard. And honestly, the only way that I found consistent value with Genji is, like, by nanoblading a lot, and it just made him feel like a blade bot. Like, you didn't do anything until you nanobladed, and that's not a frustrating combo to lose to over and over again. And it's not really a fun experience for Genji. I would say you should probably buff his neutral in some way. A little bit of ammo, a little bit of damage back, some combination of the two slightly. He doesn't need anything crazy, just a little tiny bit of love. But let me know how you feel about Genji in the comments down below. The next character that we gotta talk about is definitely Roadhog, one of the worst tanks right now. Still a decent counter tank pick. I think Roadhog is actually quite good against Hammond, Doomfist, and you could play him against a couple of other tanks. However, some of the problems of Roadhog is he kind of lost his identity. He's not the greatest brawler. His CC is just really, really slow and clunky when it doesn't one-shot. It's like not worth the setup compared to a lot of other tanks. And yeah, I don't really think that the character feels all that powerful, menacing, scary, and most of the time he's just like a freaking giant blob on the battlefield that you can more or less ignore. I do think that Roadhog would be better suited getting a complete rework to several aspects of his kit, and overall, of course, it would be a buff to the character, but he would play far different, not double downing on his one-shot capabilities, but actually turning into something similar to how Orisa was changed going into Overwatch 2. I think that would be the best course of action for Hog, but let me know if you want to keep Hog the same and just buff his numbers, or would you like Hog to be changed or reworked fundamentally? The next character that we gotta talk about is Kiriko. And it's no surprise that Kiriko is just completely absurd with many of her abilities. Teleport, Suzu, and her ultimate are all top tier abilities and ultimates in the game. And really, Kiriko stands out as just one of the most powerful characters that we've seen basically ever. Now, as we've seen with Mercy, I think that you can dramatically change a meta by making a support a lot easier to punish. And that's one of the big problems with Kiriko, in my personal opinion, is that she's almost impossible to punish, not because of her Suzu, but because of her teleport. I think increasing the cooldown of Kiriko's teleport slightly would make it so bad Kirikos that want to go aggressive often can get punished because they won't have their teleport later on. But then again, it pulls Kiriko's away from that aggressive playstyle and to a more heal body playstyle, which still gives you a lot of value on Kiriko specifically, but maybe isn't the direction Blizzard wants to push the character in. Now, something I was really surprised by, though, is that Blizzard said at the highest ranks of play, Kiriko doesn't actually have that high of a win rate. In fact, it's about like 48% or something like that, which is really, really strange. When you compared it to a lot of the other characters like Zen right now, Kiriko is actually lagging way behind Zen with like a 55% win rate. And as someone who's grinded Zen and played Zen a lot, I understand why Zen is so damn powerful. And I think that while Kiriko has really, really powerful strengths, you do have to pick and choose with the character because there's a lot of combos that work really well, and you're losing out on some of the really powerful utility some other supports can provide. So maybe nothing needs to be done about Kiriko. If she doesn't have a very high win rate and high ranks of play, and you can't access a lot of her power level without advanced levels of mechanical skill, it kind of balances itself out. But I still would like to keep an eye on these abilities and these ability cooldowns because just a slight tweak of the meta and all of a sudden Kiriko's back on top again. And yeah, she is insanely powerful. And we all know how strong Suzu is. It like warps the entire meta around it. But as usual, let me know how you feel about Kiriko down below. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Reaper. Reaper is a DPS that has slowly but surely fallen out the wayside. At the start in the beta, Reaper was actually really powerful, but they severely reeled back a lot of his numbers. And I think that Reaper really, really got hurt, especially from the fact that he no longer gets speed boost after a kill, which allowed him to create some amount of momentum and just being able to chain kills together, similar to how Genji got heavily buffed by that, but it was reverted. Now, an idea that I have for Reaper is actually just make it so that he does increase damage to tanks. That would be kind of cool. Or maybe he ignores armor or something like that. I'm not entirely sure what you would do, but basically right now, Reaper can't always just burst down tanks in the way that you would think he should be able to. And a lot of tanks just like don't care because they're freaking monsters. But maybe if they actually were legitimately afraid of Reaper, Reaper would be better and better. And as a tank player myself, I never truly fear any DPS all that much in a 1v1, and I think that that should probably change with a character like Reaper. I think having him as a legitimate tank buster would at the very least give him intrinsic value just being on the battlefield, but I don't know the perfect way to do that, but I definitely do think that Reaper needs some buffs. Next up, we do got to talk about Hanzo, where just like his DPS counterpart Genji, Hanzo's gotten the short end of the stick primarily because of two reasons. One, his passive got completely removed. Like, he doesn't benefit from the reload passive, nor does he get his movement passive anymore. So Hanzo just gets no DPS passive because fuck Hanzo, I guess. And two, Storm Arrow is like sucks. Storm Arrow is like a terrible ability. Every Hanzo player knows that Storm Arrow most of the time is just slightly increased damage or just helps you close out a kill. It's not reliable tank busting damage. It's not reliable closing damage. And yeah, I would like some extra versatility in his kit. So replace Storm Arrow with something a little bit more practical. And maybe give him a passive of some kind. Honestly, the DPS passive should probably be split into like 3 types. Imagine if there was 3 subclasses of DPS and every DPS was put into one of these 3 subclasses and each subclass had different passives because all the DPS are so different from one another. You could do the same thing for support and tank if you wanted to. So dive tanks and brawl tanks had different passives, and like non-mobility supports and mobility supports had different passives, or main and off healer or whatever the case may be. You could definitely do something like that because right now having like a catch-all this is a passive for the entire role when all the characters are so different. It's just creating problems with imbalance in my personal opinion, and I think that Hanzo is a great example of this. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is Mercy and also Pharah. I'm kind of pairing them together here because the Pharah Mercy problem is worse than ever, especially on console with the Mercy pocket and the increased healing. Her pocketing anything is actually just completely absurd with how difficult it can be to kill that target. Mercy does over 60 heals per second on a low HP target, and with that on a nade, it's like 90, and it's just completely absurd. I do think that most players would much rather Mercy have the movement as opposed to like this crazy healing output that's just insane. I think you could easily balance Mercy in other ways. Like, instead of giving her this crazy amounts of heal, you could have made it so Resurrect took a lot longer, or you could have not neutered movement quite as bad, but still maybe a little bit. I don't exactly know the direction of Mercy, but I do know that her current state is less fun to play for Mercy players. They don't like it nearly as much, and more frustrating to play against in a lot of ways than Mercies of the past. So, yeah, definitely one that Blizzard should take a look at. But let me know down below what you would do to Mercy and how would you make her still decent, still good, but not nearly as busted with that burst healing. Pharah, on the other hand, is primarily being propped up by Mercy, even though I think Pharah is a problem. Like I said, especially on console, with Mercy in her state, I think if you changed Mercy in some way, the Pharah menace wouldn't be nearly as bad, but this has kind of been a problem throughout all of console that has been mainly ignored. At least that's what everyone on console tells me. Now, last but certainly not least, we got to talk about Sombra. I think that Sombra is better in this season than we've seen her in the past, but still fairly weak unless you're countering something in particular, like a Wrecking Ball, and even that's not always the best thing to do. You're not really doing all that much on this character. I really am pushing more for reworks as opposed to just a power increase on this character. Hack is pretty unfun. Staying inside invis and being able to hack with no counterplay is just silly on the side of Sombra and on the side of people trying to play against Sombra. Make the character more powerful and rework some of these abilities. I think there's a lot of directions you could take this character, but her current state is not that strong, and if it was strong, it would be super unfun to play against. So, yeah, what are your suggestions? But these are my 10 heroes that need buffs, nerfs, and reworks. Let me know what your 10 heroes are down below, and smash the like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Thank you all for coming by, and I'll see you next time.